Book 6, Chapter 1 of Les Misérables, translated by Isabella F. Hapgood. Les Misérables by Victor Hugo. Book 6, Javert. Chapter 1, The Beginning of Repose. Monsieur Madeleine had Fantine removed to that infirmary which he had established in his own house. He confided her to the sisters, who put her to bed. A burning fever had come on. She passed a part of the night in delirium and raving. At length, however, she fell asleep. On the morrow, towards midday, Fantine awoke. She heard someone breathing close to her bed. She drew aside the curtain and saw Monsieur Madeleine standing there and looking at something over her head. His gaze was full of pity, anguish, and supplication. She followed its direction, and saw that it was fixed on a crucifix which was nailed to the wall. Thenceforth, Monsieur Madeleine was transfigured in Fantine's eyes. He seemed to her to be clothed in light. He was absorbed in a sort of prayer. She gazed at him for a long time, without daring to interrupt him. At last, she said timidly, "What are you doing?" Monsieur Madeleine had been there for an hour. He had been waiting for Fantine to awake. He took her hand, felt of her pulse, and replied, "How do you feel?" "Well, I have slept," she replied. "I think that I am better. It is nothing." He answered, responding to the first question which she had put to him, as though he had just heard it. "I was praying to the martyr there on high." And he added in his own mind, "For the martyr here below." Monsieur Madeleine had passed the night and the morning in making inquiries. He knew all now. He knew Fantine's history in all its heart-rending details. He went on, "You have suffered much, poor mother. Oh, do not complain. You now have the dowry of the elect. It is thus that men are transformed into angels. It is not their fault. They do not know how to go to work otherwise. You see, this hell from which you have just emerged is the first form of heaven. It was necessary to begin there." He sighed deeply, but she smiled on him with that sublime smile in which 2 teeth were lacking. That same night, Javert wrote a letter. The next morning he posted it himself at the office of Montreuil-sur-Mer. It was addressed to Paris, and the superscription ran, "To Monsieur Chabouillet, Secretary of Monsieur le Préfet of Police." As the affair in the station house had been brooded about, the postmistress and some other persons who saw the letter before it was sent off, and who recognized Javert's handwriting on the cover, thought that he was sending in his resignation. Monsieur Madeleine made haste to write to the Thénardiers. Fantine owed them 120 francs. He sent them 300 francs, telling them to pay themselves from that sum, and to fetch the child instantly to Montreuil-sur-Mer, where her sick mother required her presence. This dazzled Thénardier. "The devil!" said the man to his wife. "Don't let's allow the child to go. This lark is going to turn into a milch cow. I see through it. Some ninny has taken a fancy to the mother." He replied with a very well drawn-up bill for 500 and some odd francs. In this memorandum, 2 indisputable items figured up over 300 francs, one for the doctor, the other for the apothecary, who had attended and physicked Éponine and Azelma through 2 long illnesses. Cosette, as we have already said, had not been ill. It was only a question of a trifling substitution of names. At the foot of the memorandum, Thénardier wrote, Received on account 300 francs. Monsieur Madeleine immediately sent 300 francs more, and wrote, "Make haste to bring Cosette." "Christi!" said Thénardier, "let's not give up the child." In the meantime, Fantine did not recover. She still remained in the infirmary. The sisters had at first only received and nursed "that woman" with repugnance. Those who have seen the bas-reliefs of Rheims will recall the inflation of the lower lip of the wise virgins as they survey the foolish virgins. The ancient scorn of the Vestals for the emboubagie is one of the most profound instincts of feminine dignity. The sisters felt it with the double force contributed by religion. But in a few days, Fantine disarmed them. She said all kinds of humble and gentle things, and the mother in her provoked tenderness. One day, the sisters heard her say amid her fever, "I have been a sinner, but when I have my child beside me, it will be a sign that God has pardoned me. While I was leading a bad life, I should not have liked to have my Cosette with me. I could not have borne her sad, astonished eyes. It was for her sake that I did evil, and that is why God pardons me. I shall feel the benediction of the good God when Cosette is here. I shall gaze at her. It will do me good to see that innocent creature. She knows nothing at all. She is an angel, you see, my sisters. At that age, the wings have not fallen off." Monsieur Madeleine went to see her twice a day, and each time she asked him, "Shall I see my Cosette soon?" He answered, "Tomorrow, perhaps. She may arrive at any moment. I am expecting her." And the mother's pale face grew radiant. "Oh," she said, "how happy I am going to be." We have just said that she did not recover her health. On the contrary, her condition seemed to become more grave from week to week. That handful of snow applied to her bare skin between her shoulder blades had brought about a sudden suppression of perspiration, as a consequence of which the malady which had been smouldering within her for many years was violently developed at last. At that time, people were beginning to follow the fine Linac's fine suggestions on the study and treatment of chest maladies. The doctor sounded Fantine's chest, and shook his head. Monsieur Madeleine said to the doctor, "Well?" "Has she not a child which she desires to see?" said the doctor. "Yes." "Well, make haste and get it here." Monsieur Madeleine shuddered. Fantine inquired, "What did the doctor say?" Monsieur Madeleine forced himself to smile. "He said that your child was to be brought speedily, that would restore your health." "Oh," she rejoined, "he is right. But what do those Thénardiers mean by keeping my Cosette from me? Oh, she is coming. At last I behold happiness close beside me." In the meantime, Thénardier did not let go of the child, and gave 100 insufficient reasons for it. Cosette was not quite well enough to take a journey in the winter, and then there still remained some petty but pressing debts in the neighborhood, and they were collecting the bills for them, etc., etc. "I shall send someone to fetch Cosette," said Father Madeleine. "If necessary, I will go myself." He wrote the following letter to Fantine's dictation, and made her sign it. Monsieur Thénardier, you will deliver Cosette to this person. You will be paid for all the little things. I have the honor to salute you with respect. Fantine. In the meantime, a serious incident occurred. Carve as we will the mysterious block of which our life is made, the black vein of destiny constantly reappears in it. End of Book 6, Chapter 1. Book 6, Chapter 2 of Les Misérables, translated by Isabel F. Hapgood. Les Misérables by Victor Hugo. Book 6, Javert. Chapter 2, How Jean May Become Cham. One morning, Monsieur Madeleine was in his study, occupied in arranging in advance some pressing matters connected with the mayor's office, in case he should decide to take the trip to Montfermeil, when he was informed that Police Inspector Javert was desirous of speaking with him. Madeleine could not refrain from a disagreeable impression on hearing this name. Javert had avoided him more than ever since the affair of the police station, and Monsieur Madeleine had not seen him. "Admit him," he said. Javert entered. Monsieur Madeleine had retained his seat near the fire, pen in hand, his eyes fixed on the docket which he was turning over and annotating, and which contained the trials of the Commission on Highways for the infraction of police regulations. He did not disturb himself on Javert's account. He could not help thinking of poor Fantine, and it suited him to be glacial in his manner. Javert bestowed a respectful salute on the mayor, whose back was turned to him. The mayor did not look at him, but went on annotating the docket. Javert advanced 2 or 3 paces into the study, and halted, without breaking the silence. If any physiognomist who had been familiar with Javert, and who had made a lengthy study of this savage in the service of civilization, this singular composite of the Roman, the Spartan, the monk, and the corporal, this spy who was incapable of a lie, this unspotted police agent, if any physiognomist had known his secret and long-cherished aversion for Monsieur Madeleine, his conflict with the mayor on the subject of Fantine, and had examined Javert at that moment, he would have said to himself, "What has taken place?" It was evident to anyone acquainted with that clear, upright, sincere, honest, austere, and ferocious conscience, that Javert had but just gone through some great interior struggle. Javert had nothing in his soul which he had not also in his countenance. Like violent people in general, he was subject to abrupt changes of opinion. His physiognomy had never been more peculiar and startling. On entering, he bowed to Monsieur Madeleine with a look in which there was neither rancor, anger, nor distrust. He halted a few paces in the rear of the mayor's armchair, and there he stood, perfectly erect, in an attitude almost of discipline, with the cold, ingenuous roughness of a man who has never been gentle, and who has always been patient. He waited without uttering a word, without making a movement, in genuine humility and tranquil resignation, calm, serious, hat in hand, with eyes cast down, and an expression which was halfway between that of a soldier in the presence of his officer and a criminal in the presence of his judge, until it should please the mayor to turn around. All the sentiments, as well as all the memories which one might have attributed to him, had disappeared. That face, as impenetrable and simple as granite, no longer bore any trace of anything but a melancholy depression. His whole person breathed lowliness and firmness and an indescribable, courageous despondency. At last the mayor laid down his pen and turned half round. "Well, what is it? What is the matter, Javert?" Javert remained silent for an instant, as though collecting his ideas, then raised his voice with a sort of sad solemnity, which did not, however, preclude simplicity. "This is the matter, Monsieur Mayor. A culpable act has been committed." "What act?" "An inferior agent of the authorities has failed in respect, and in the gravest manner, towards a magistrate. I have come to bring the fact to your attention, as it is my duty to do." "Who is the agent?" asked Monsieur Madeleine. "I," said Javert. "You?" "I." "And who is the magistrate who has reason to complain of the agent?" "You, Monsieur Mayor." Monsieur Madeleine sat erect in his armchair. Javert went on, with a severe air, and his eyes still cast down. "Monsieur Mayor, I have come to request you to instigate the authorities to dismiss me." Monsieur Madeleine opened his mouth in amazement. Javert interrupted him. "You will say that I might have handed in my resignation, but that does not suffice. Handing in one's resignation is honorable. I have failed in my duty. I ought to be punished. I must be turned out." And after a pause he added, "Monsieur Mayor, you were severe with me the other day, and unjustly. Be so today with justice." "Come now, why?" exclaimed Monsieur Madeleine. "What nonsense is this? What is the meaning of this? What culpable act have you been guilty of towards me? What have you done to me? What are your wrongs with regard to me? You accuse yourself. You wish to be superseded." "Turned out," said Javert. "Turned out. So be it, then. That is well. I do not understand." "You shall understand, Monsieur Mayor." Javert sighed from the very bottom of his chest, and resumed, still coldly and sadly. "Monsieur Mayor, 6 weeks ago, in consequence of the scene over that woman, I was furious, and I informed against you." "Informed against me?" "At the prefecture of police in Paris." Monsieur Madeleine, who was not in the habit of laughing much oftener than Javert himself, burst out laughing now. "As a mayor who had encroached on the province of the police?" "As an ex-convict." The mayor turned livid. Javert, who had not raised his eyes, went on. "I thought it was so. I had had an idea for a long time, a resemblance, inquiries which you had caused to be made at Faverolles, the strength of your loins, the adventure with old Fauchelevent, your skill in marksmanship, your leg, which you drag a little. I hardly know what all. Absurdities. But, at all events, I took you for a certain Jean Valjean." "A certain... what did you say the name was?" "Jean Valjean. He was a convict whom I was in the habit of seeing 20 years ago, when I was adjutant guard of convicts at Toulon. On leaving the galleys, this Jean Valjean, as it appears, robbed a bishop. Then he committed another theft, accompanied with violence, on a public highway, on the person of a little Savoyard. He disappeared 8 years ago, no one knows how, and he has been sought, I fancied. In short, I did this thing. Wrath impelled me. I denounced you at the prefecture." Monsieur Madeleine, who had taken up the docket again several moments before this, resumed with an air of perfect indifference. "And what reply did you receive?" "That I was mad." "Well?" "Well, they were right." "It is lucky that you recognize the fact." "I am forced to do so, since the real Jean Valjean has been found." The sheet of paper which Monsieur Madeleine was holding dropped from his hand. He raised his head, gazed fixedly at Javert, and said with his indescribable accent, "Ah." Javert continued. "This is the way it is, Monsieur Mayor. It seems that there was in the neighborhood near Ailly-le-Haut-Clocher an old fellow who was called Father Champmathieu. He was a very wretched creature. No one paid any attention to him. No one knows what such people subsist on. Lately, last autumn, Father Champmathieu was arrested for the theft of some cider apples from... well, no matter. A theft had been committed, a wall scaled, branches of trees broken. My Champmathieu was arrested. He still had the branch of apple tree in his hand. The scamp is locked up. Up to this point, it was merely an affair of a misdemeanor, but here is where Providence intervened. The jail being in a bad condition, the examining magistrate finds it convenient to transfer Champmathieu to Arras, where the departmental prison is situated. In this prison at Arras, there is an ex-convict named Brevet, who is detained for I know not what, and who has been appointed turnkey of the house because of good behavior. Monsieur Maire, no sooner had Champmathieu arrived than Brevet exclaims, "Eh, why, I know that man. He is a faggot. Take a good look at me, my good man. You are Jean Valjean." "Jean Valjean? Who's Jean Valjean?" Champmathieu feigns astonishment. "Don't play the innocent dodge," says Brevet. "You are Jean Valjean. You have been at the galleys of Toulon. It was 20 years ago. We were there together." Champmathieu denies it. "Parbleu, you understand. The case is investigated. The thing was well ventilated for me. This is what they discovered." This Champmathieu had been, 30 years ago, a pruner of trees in various localities, notably at Faverolles. There all trace of him was lost. A long time afterwards, he was seen again in Auvergne, then in Paris, where he is said to have been a wheelwright, and to have had a daughter who was a laundress, but that has not been proved. Now, before going to the galleys for theft, what was Jean Valjean? A pruner of trees. Where? At Faverolles. Another fact. This Valjean's Christian name was Jean, and his mother's surname was Mathieu. What more natural to suppose than that, on emerging from the galleys, he should have taken his mother's name for the purpose of concealing himself, and have called himself Jean Mathieu. He goes to Auvergne. The local pronunciation turns Jean into Jean. He is called Champmathieu. Our man offers no opposition, and behold him transformed into Champmathieu. You follow me, do you not? Inquiries were made at Faverolles. The family of Jean Valjean is no longer there. It is not known where they have gone. You know that among those classes a family often disappears. Search was made and nothing was found. When such people are not mud, they are dust. And then, as the beginning of the story dates 30 years back, there is no longer anyone at Faverolles who knew Jean Valjean. Inquiries were made at Toulon. Besides Brevet, there are only 2 convicts in existence who have seen Jean Valjean. They are Cochepaille and Chenildieu, and are sentenced for life. They are taken from the galleys and confronted with the pretended Champmathieu. They do not hesitate. He is Jean Valjean for them as well as for Brevet. The same age. He is 54. The same height, the same air, the same man. In short, it is he. It was precisely at this moment that I forwarded my denunciation to the prefecture in Paris. I was told that I had lost my reason, and that Jean Valjean is at Arras in the power of the authorities. You can imagine whether this surprised me, when I thought that I had that same Jean Valjean here. I write to the examining judge. He sends for me. Champmathieu is conducted to me. "Well?" interposed Monsieur Madeleine. Javert replied, his face incorruptible, and as melancholy as ever. "Monsieur Maire, the truth is the truth. I am sorry, but that man is Jean Valjean. I recognized him also." Monsieur Madeleine resumed, in a very low voice, "You are sure?" Javert began to laugh, with that mournful laugh which comes from profound conviction. "Oh, sure!" He stood there thoughtfully for a moment, mechanically taking pinches of powdered wood for blotting ink from the wooden bowl which stood on the table, and he added, "And even now that I have seen the real Jean Valjean, I do not see how I could have thought otherwise. I beg your pardon, Monsieur Maire." Javert, as he addressed these grave and supplicating words to the man who 6 weeks before had humiliated him in the presence of the whole station-house, and bade him leave the room, Javert, that haughty man, was unconsciously full of simplicity and dignity. Monsieur Madeleine made no other reply to his prayer than the abrupt question, "And what does this man say?" "Ah, indeed, Monsieur Maire, it's a bad business. If he is Jean Valjean, he has his previous conviction against him. To climb a wall, to break a branch, to purloin apples, is a mischievous trick in a child. For a man, it is a misdemeanor. For a convict, it is a crime. Robbing and housebreaking, it is all there. It is no longer a question of correctional police. It is a matter for the court of assizes. It is no longer a matter of a few days in prison. It is the galleys for life. And then there is the affair with the little Savoyard, who will return, I hope. The deuce! There is plenty to dispute in the matter, is there not? Yes, for anyone but Jean Valjean. But Jean Valjean is a sly dog. That is the way I recognized him. Any other man would have felt that things were getting hot for him. He would struggle, he would cry out. The kettle sings before the fire. He would not be Jean Valjean, etc. But he has not the appearance of understanding. He says, I am Champmathieu, and I won't depart from that. He has an astonished air. He pretends to be stupid. It is far better. Oh, the rogue is clever. But it makes no difference. The proofs are there. He has been recognized by 4 persons. The old scamp will be condemned. The case has been taken to the assizes at Arras. I shall go there to give my testimony. I have been summoned. Monsieur Madeleine had turned to his desk again, and taken up his docket, and was turning over the leaves tranquilly, reading and writing by turns like a busy man. He turned to Javert. That will do, Javert. In truth, all these details interest me but little. We are wasting our time, and we have pressing business on hand. Javert, you will betake yourself at once to the house of the woman Bucepied, who sells herbs at the corner of the Rue Saint-Sauve. You will tell her that she must enter her complaint against Carter Pierre Chenelong. The man is a brute who came near crushing this woman and her child. He must be punished. You will then go to Monsieur Charcier, Rue Montre de Champigny. He complained that there is a gutter on the adjoining house which discharges rainwater on his premises and is undermining the foundations of his house. After that, you will verify the infractions of police regulations which have been reported to me in the Rue Guibourg at Widow Dory's and Rue Garot Blanc at Madame Renée Lebosse's, and you will prepare documents. But I am giving you a great deal of work. Are you not to be absent? Did you not tell me that you were going to Arras on that matter in a week or 10 days? Sooner than that, Monsieur Mayor. On what day, then? Why, I thought that I had said to Monsieur le Maire that the case was to be tried tomorrow, and that I am to set out by diligence tonight. Monsieur Madeleine made an imperceptible movement. And how long will the case last? 1 day, at the most. The judgment will be pronounced tomorrow evening at latest, but I shall not wait for the sentence, which is certain. I shall return here as soon as my deposition has been taken. That is well, said Monsieur Madeleine, and he dismissed Javert with a wave of the hand. Javert did not withdraw. Excuse me, Monsieur Mayor, said he. What is it now? Demanded Monsieur Madeleine. Monsieur Mayor, there is still something of which I must remind you. What is it? That I must be dismissed. Monsieur Madeleine rose. Javert, you are a man of honor, and I esteem you. You exaggerate your fault. Moreover, this is an offense which concerns me. Javert, you deserve promotion instead of degradation. I wish you to retain your post. Javert gazed at Monsieur Madeleine with his candid eyes, in whose depths his not very enlightened, but pure and rigid conscience seemed visible, and said in a tranquil voice, Monsieur Mayor, I cannot grant you that. I repeat, replied Monsieur Madeleine, that the matter concerns me. But Javert, heeding his own thought only, continued, So far as exaggeration is concerned, I am not exaggerating. This is the way I reason. I have suspected you unjustly. That is nothing. It is our right to cherish suspicion, although suspicion directed above ourselves is an abuse. But without proofs, in a fit of rage, with the object of wreaking my vengeance, I have denounced you as a convict. You, a respectable man, a mayor, a magistrate. That is serious, very serious. I have insulted authority in your person, I, an agent of the authorities. If one of my subordinates had done what I have done, I should have declared him unworthy of the service and have expelled him. Well, stop, Monsieur Mayor. One word more. I have often been severe in the course of my life towards others. That is just. I have done well. Now, if I were not severe towards myself, all the justice that I have done would become injustice. Ought I to spare myself more than others? No. What? I should be good for nothing but to chastise others and not myself. Why, I should be a blackguard. Those who say that blackguard of a Javert would be in the right. Monsieur Mayor, I do not desire that you should treat me kindly. Your kindness roused sufficient bad blood in me when it was directed to others. I want none of it for myself. The kindness which consists in upholding a woman of the town against a citizen, the police agent against the mayor, the man who is down against the man who is up in the world, is what I call false kindness. That is the sort of kindness which disorganizes society. Good God, it is very easy to be kind. The difficulty lies in being just. Come, if you had been what I thought you, I should not have been kind to you, not I. You would have seen. Monsieur Mayor, I must treat myself as I would treat any other man. When I have subdued malefactors, when I have proceeded with vigor against rascals, I have often said to myself, if you flinch, if I ever catch you in a fault, you may rest at your ease. I have flinched. I have caught myself in a fault. So much the worse. Come, discharged, cashiered, expelled. That is well. I have arms. I will till the soil. It makes no difference to me. Monsieur Mayor, the good of the service demands an example. I simply require the discharge of Inspector Javert. All this was uttered in a proud, humble, despairing, yet convinced tone, which lent indescribable grandeur to this singular, honest man. We shall see, said Monsieur Madeleine, and he offered him his hand. Javert recoiled, and said in a wild voice, Excuse me, Monsieur Mayor, but this must not be. A mayor does not offer his hand to a police spy. He added between his teeth, A police spy, yes. From the moment when I have misused the police, I am no more than a police spy. Then he bowed profoundly, and directed his steps towards the door. There he wheeled round, and with eyes still downcast, Monsieur Mayor, he said, I shall continue to serve until I am superseded. He withdrew. Monsieur Madeleine remained thoughtfully listening to the firm, sure step, which died away on the pavement of the corridor. End of Book 6, Chapter 2.
Book 7, Chapter 1 of Les Misérables. Translated by Isabel F. Hapgood. Les Misérables by Victor Hugo. Book 7, Chapter 1. Sister Simplice. The incidents the reader is about to peruse were not all known at Montreuil-sur-Mer, but the small portion of them which became known left such a memory in that town that a serious gap would exist in this book if we did not narrate them in their most minute details. Among these details the reader will encounter 2 or 3 improbable circumstances, which we preserve out of respect for the truth. On the afternoon following the visit of Javert, M. Madeleine went to see Fantine according to his wont. Before entering Fantine's room, he had Sister Simplice summoned. The 2 nuns, who performed the services of nurse in the infirmary, Lazarist ladies, like all sisters of charity, bore the names of Sister Perpétue and Sister Simplice. Sister Perpétue was an ordinary villager, a sister of charity, in a coarse style, who had entered the service of God as one enters any other service. She was a nun, as other women are cooks. This type is not so very rare. The monastic orders gladly accept this heavy peasant earthenware, which is easily fashioned into a Capuchin or an Ursuline. These rustics are utilized for the rough work of devotion. The transition from a drover to a Carmelite is not in the least violent. The one turns into the other without much effort. The fund of ignorance common to the village and the cloister is a preparation ready at hand, and places the boor at once on the same footing as the monk, a little more amplitude in the smock, and it becomes a frock. Sister Perpétue was a robust nun from the Marines near Pontoise, who chattered her patois, droned, grumbled, sugared the potion according to the bigotry or the hypocrisy of the invalid, treated her patients abruptly, roughly, was crabbed with the dying, almost flung God in their faces, stoned their death agony with prayers mumbled in a rage, was bold, honest, and ruddy. Sister Simplice was white, with a waxen pallor. Besides Sister Perpétue, she was the taper beside the candle. Vincent de Paul has divinely traced the features of the Sister of Charity in these admirable words, in which he mingles as much freedom as servitude. They shall have for their convent only the house of the sick, for cell only a hired room, for chapel only their parish church, for cloister only the streets of the town and the wards of the hospitals, for enclosure only obedience, for gratings only the fear of God, for veil only modesty. This ideal was realized in the living person of Sister Simplice. She had never been young, and it seemed as though she would never grow old. No one could have told Sister Simplice's age. She was a person, we dare not say a woman, who was gentle, austere, well-bred, cold, and who had never lied. She was so gentle that she appeared fragile, but she was more solid than granite. She touched the unhappy with fingers that were charmingly pure and fine. There was, so to speak, silence in her speech. She said just what was necessary, and she possessed a tone of voice which would have equally edified a confessional or enchanted a drawing-room. This delicacy accommodated itself to the serge gown, finding in this harsh contact a continual reminder of heaven and of God. Let us emphasize one detail: never to have lied, never to have said, for any interest whatever, even in indifference, any single thing which was not the truth, the sacred truth, was Sister Simplice's distinctive trait. It was the accent of her virtue. She was almost renowned in the congregation for this imperturbable veracity. The Abbé Sicard speaks of Sister Simplice in a letter to the deaf-mute Massieu. However pure and sincere we may be, we all bear upon our candor the crack of the little, innocent lie. She did not. Little lie, innocent lie. Does such a thing exist? To lie is the absolute form of evil. To lie a little is not possible. He who lies, lies the whole lie. To lie is the very face of the demon. Satan has two names. He is called Satan and Lying. That is what she thought, and as she thought, so she did. The result was the whiteness which we have mentioned, a whiteness which covered even her lips and her eyes with radiance. Her smile was white, her glance was white. There was not a single spider's web, not a grain of dust, on the glass window of that conscience. On entering the order of Saint Vincent de Paul, she had taken the name of Simplice by special choice. Simplice of Sicily, as we know, is the saint who preferred to allow both her breasts to be torn off rather than to say that she had been born at Segesta when she had been born at Syracuse, a lie which would have saved her. This patron saint suited this soul. Sister Simplice, on her entrance into the order, had had two faults which she had gradually corrected. She had a taste for dainties, and she liked to receive letters. She never read anything but a book of prayers printed in Latin, in coarse type. She did not understand Latin, but she understood the book. This pious woman had conceived an affection for Fantine, probably feeling a latent virtue there, and she had devoted herself almost exclusively to her care. Monsieur Madeleine took Sister Simplice apart, and recommended Fantine to her in a singular tone, which the sister recalled later on. On leaving the sister, he approached Fantine. Fantine awaited Monsieur Madeleine's appearance every day as one awaits a ray of warmth and joy. She said to the sisters, "I only live when Monsieur le Maire is here." She had a great deal of fever that day. As soon as she saw Monsieur Madeleine, she asked him, "And Cosette?" He replied with a smile, "Soon." Monsieur Madeleine was the same as usual with Fantine, only he remained an hour instead of half an hour, to Fantine's great delight. He urged every one repeatedly not to allow the invalid to want for anything. It was noticed that there was a moment when his countenance became very sombre, but this was explained when it became known that the doctor had bent down to his ear and said to him, "She's losing ground fast." Then he returned to the town hall, and the clerk observed him attentively, examining a road map of France which hung in his study. He wrote a few figures on a bit of paper with a pencil. End of Book 7, Chapter 1.
Book 7, Chapter 2 of Les Misérables, translated by Isabel F. Hapgood. Les Misérables by Victor Hugo. Recording by Betty Greeby in Wapella, Illinois. Book 7, Chapter 2. The Perspicacity of Master Scaufflaire. From the town hall he betook himself to the extremity of the town, to a Fleming named Master Scaufflaire, French Scaufflaire, who let out horses and cabriolets as desired. In order to reach this Scaufflaire, the shortest way was to take the little frequented street in which was situated the parsonage of the parish in which M. Madeleine resided. The cure was, it was said, a worthy, respectable, and sensible man. At the moment when M. Madeleine arrived in front of the parsonage, there was but one passer-by in the street, and this person noticed this. After the mayor had passed the priest's house, he halted, stood motionless, then turned about, and retraced his steps to the door of the parsonage, which had an iron knocker. He laid his hand quickly on the knocker and lifted it. Then he paused again and stopped short, as though in thought, and after the lapse of a few seconds, instead of allowing the knocker to fall abruptly, he placed it gently and resumed his way with a sort of haste which had not been apparent previously. M. Madeleine found Master Scaufflaire at home, engaged in stitching a harness over. "Master Scaufflaire," he inquired, "have you a good horse?" "Mr. Mayor," said the Fleming, "all my horses are good. What do you mean by a good horse?" I mean a horse that can travel 20 leagues in a day." "The deuce!" said the Fleming. 20 leagues!" "Yes." "Hitched to a cabriolet?" "Yes." "And how long can he rest at the end of his journey?" "He must be able to set out again on the next day, if necessary." "To traverse the same road?" "Yes." "The deuce! The deuce! And it is 20 leagues?" M. Madeleine drew from his pocket the paper on which he had penciled some figures. He showed it to the Fleming. The figures were 5, 6, 8.5. "You see," he said, "total 19.5, as well as say 20 leagues." "Mr. Mayor," returned the Fleming, "I have just what you want. My little white horse. You may have seen him pass occasionally. He is a small beast from Lower Boulonnais. He is full of fire. They wanted to make a saddle horse of him at first. Bah! He reared, he kicked, he laid everybody flat on the ground. He was thought to be vicious, and no one knew what to do with him. I bought him. I harnessed him to a carriage. That is what he wanted, sir. He is as gentle as a girl, he goes like the wind. Ah, indeed, he must not be mounted. It does not suit his ideas to be a saddle horse. Everyone has his ambition. Draw? Yes. Carry? No. We must suppose that is what he said to himself." "And he will accomplish the trip?" "Your 20 leagues, all at a full trot, and in less than 8 hours. But here are the conditions." "State them." "In the first place, you will give him half an hour's breathing spell midway of the road. He will eat, and someone must be by while he is eating to prevent the stable boy of the inn from stealing his oats, for I have noticed in inns that oats are more often drunk by the stablemen than eaten by the horses. Someone will be by. In the second place, is the cabriolet for Monsieur le Maire?" "Yes." "Does Monsieur le Maire know how to drive?" "Yes." "Well, Monsieur le Maire will travel alone and without baggage, in order not to overload the horse." "Agreed." "But as Monsieur le Maire will have no one with him, he will be obliged to take the trouble himself of seeing that the oats are not stolen." "That is understood." "I am to have 30 francs a day, the days of rest to be paid for also, not a farthing less, and the beast's food to be at Monsieur le Maire's expense." M. Madeleine drew 3 napoleons from his purse and laid them on the table. "Here is the pay for 2 days in advance. Fourthly, for such a journey, a cabriolet would be too heavy, and would fatigue the horse. Monsieur le Maire must consent to travel in a little tilbury that I own." "I consent to that." "It is light, but it has no cover." "That makes no difference to me." "Has Monsieur le Maire reflected that we are in the middle of winter?" M. Madeleine did not reply. The Fleming resumed. "That it is very cold?" M. Madeleine preserved silence. Master Scaufflaire continued. "That it may rain?" M. Madeleine raised his head and said, "The tilbury and the horse will be in front of my door tomorrow morning at 4:30. "Of course, Monsieur le Maire," replied Scaufflaire. Then, scratching a speck in the wood of the table with his thumbnail, he resumed with that careless air which the Flemings understand so well how to mingle with their shrewdness. "But this is what I am thinking now. Monsieur le Maire has not told me where he is going. Where is Monsieur le Maire going?" He had been thinking of nothing else since the beginning of the conversation, but he did not know why he had not dared to put the question. "Are your horse's forelegs good?" said M. Madeleine. "Yes, Monsieur le Maire. You must hold him in a little when going downhill. Are there many descents between here and the place whither you are going?" "Do not forget to be at my door at precisely 4:30 tomorrow morning," replied M. Madeleine, and he took his departure. The Fleming remained utterly stupid, as he himself said some time afterwards. The mayor had been gone 2 or 3 minutes when the door opened again. It was the mayor once more. He still wore the same impassive and preoccupied air. "Monsieur Scaufflaire," said he, "at what sum do you estimate the value of the horse and tilbury which you are to let me, the one bearing the other?" "The one dragging the other, Monsieur le Maire," said the Fleming, with a broad smile. "So be it. Well?" "Does Monsieur le Maire wish to purchase them or me?" "No, but I wish to guarantee you in any case. You shall give me back the sum at my return. At what value do you estimate your horse and cabriolet?" 500 francs, Monsieur le Maire." "Here it is." M. Madeleine laid a bank bill on the table, then left the room, and this time he did not return. Master Scaufflaire experienced a frightful regret that he had not said 1,000 francs. Besides, the horse and tilbury together were worth 100 crowns. The Fleming called his wife and related the affair to her. "Where the devil could Monsieur le Maire be going?" They held counsel together. "He is going to Paris," said the wife. "I don't believe it," said the husband. M. Madeleine had forgotten the paper with the figures on it, and it lay on the chimney-piece. The Fleming picked it up and studied it. 5, 6, 8.5. That must designate the posting relays. He turned to his wife. "I have found out." "What?" "It is 5 leagues from here to Hesdin, 6 from Hesdin to St. Paul, 8.5 from St. Paul to Arras. He is going to Arras." Meanwhile, M. Madeleine had returned home. He had taken the longest way to return from Master Scaufflaire's, as though the parsonage door had been a temptation for him, and he wished to avoid it. He ascended to his room, and there he shut himself up, which is a very simple act, since he liked going to bed early. Nevertheless, the portress of the factory, who was at the same time M. Madeleine's only servant, noticed that the latter's light was extinguished at 8:30, and she mentioned it to the cashier when he came home, adding, "Is Monsieur le Maire ill? I thought he had a rather singular air." This cashier occupied a room situated directly under M. Madeleine's chamber. He paid no heed to the portress's words, but went to bed and to sleep. Towards midnight he woke with a start. In his sleep he had heard a noise above his head. He listened. It was a footstep pacing back and forth, as though someone were walking in the room above him. He listened more attentively, and recognized M. Madeleine's step. This struck him as strange. Usually there was no noise in M. Madeleine's chamber until he rose in the morning. A moment later the cashier heard a noise which resembled that of a cupboard being opened and then shut again. Then a piece of furniture was disarranged. Then a pause ensued. Then the step began again. The cashier sat up in bed, quite awake now, and staring, and through his window panes he saw the reddish gleam of a lighted window reflected on the opposite wall. From the direction of the rays it could only come from the window of M. Madeleine's chamber. The reflection wavered, as though it came rather from a fire which had been lighted than from a candle. The shadow of the window frame was not shown, which indicated that the window was wide open. The fact that this window was open in such cold weather was surprising. The cashier fell asleep again. An hour or two later he waked again. The same step was still passing slowly and regularly back and forth overhead. The reflection was still visible on the wall, but now it was pale and peaceful, like the reflection of a lamp or of a candle. The window was still open. This is what had taken place in M. Madeleine's room. End of Book 7, Chapter 2 of Les Misérables by Victor Hugo.
Book 7, Chapter 3 of Les Misérables, translated by Isabel F. Hapgood. April 2008. Les Misérables, by Victor Hugo. Book 7, Chapter 3. A Tempest in a Skull. The reader has no doubt already divined that Monsieur Madeleine is no other than Jean Valjean. We have already gazed into the depths of this conscience. The moment has now come when we must take another look into it. We do so not without emotion and trepidation. There is nothing more terrible in existence than this sort of contemplation. The eye of the spirit can nowhere find more dazzling brilliance and more shadow than in man. It can fix itself on no other thing which is more formidable, more complicated, more mysterious, and more infinite. There is a spectacle more grand than the sea. It is heaven. There is a spectacle more grand than heaven. It is the inmost recesses of the soul. To make the poem of the human conscience, were it only with reference to a single man, were it only in connection with the basest of men, would be to blend all epics into one superior and definitive epic. Conscience is the chaos of chimeras, of lusts and of temptations, the furnace of dreams, the lair of ideas of which we are ashamed. It is the pandemonium of sophisms. It is the battlefield of the passions. Penetrate at certain hours past the livid face of a human being who is engaged in reflection, and look behind, gaze into that soul, gaze into that obscurity. There, beneath that external silence, battles of giants, like those recorded in Homer, are in progress. Skirmishes of dragons and hydras and swarms of phantoms, as in Milton, visionary circles, as in Dante. What a solemn thing is this infinity which every man bears within him, and which he measures with despair against the caprices of his brain and the actions of his life. Alighieri one day met with a sinister-looking door, before which he hesitated. Here is one before us, upon whose threshold we hesitate. Let us enter, nevertheless. We have but little to add to what the reader already knows of what had happened to Jean Valjean after the adventure with little Gervais. From that moment forth he was, as we have seen, a totally different man. What the bishop had wished to make of him, that he carried out. It was more than a transformation, it was a transfiguration. He succeeded in disappearing, sold the bishop's silver, reserving only the candlesticks as a souvenir, crept from town to town, traversed France, came to M. conceived the idea which we have mentioned, accomplished what we have related, succeeded in rendering himself safe from seizure and inaccessible, and thenceforth established at M. happy in feeling his conscience saddened by the past and the first half of his existence belied by the last, he lived in peace, reassured and hopeful, having henceforth only two thoughts: to conceal his name and to sanctify his life, to escape men and to return to God. These two thoughts were so closely intertwined in his mind that they formed but a single one there. Both were equally absorbing and imperative, and ruled his slightest actions. In general, they conspired to regulate the conduct of his life. They turned him towards the gloom. They rendered him kindly and simple. They counselled him to the same things. Sometimes, however, they conflicted. In that case, as the reader will remember, the man whom all the country of M. called Monsieur Madeleine did not hesitate to sacrifice the first to the second, his security to his virtue. Thus, in spite of all his reserve and all his prudence, he had preserved the bishop's candlesticks, worn mourning for him, summoned and interrogated all the little Savoyards who passed that way, collected information regarding the families at Faverolles, and saved old Fauchelevent's life, despite the disquieting insinuations of Javert. It seemed, as we have already remarked, as though he thought, following the example of all those who have been wise, holy, and just, that his first duty was not towards himself. At the same time, it must be confessed, nothing just like this had yet presented itself. Never had the two ideas which governed the unhappy man whose sufferings we are narrating engaged in so serious a struggle. He understood this confusedly but profoundly at the very first words pronounced by Javert when the latter entered his study. At the moment when that name which he had buried beneath so many layers was so strangely articulated, he was struck with stupor, and as though intoxicated with the sinister eccentricity of his destiny, and through this stupor he felt that shudder which precedes great shocks. He bent like an oak at the approach of a storm, like a soldier at the approach of an assault. He felt shadows filled with thunders and lightnings descending upon his head. As he listened to Javert, the first thought which occurred to him was to go, to run and denounce himself, to take that Champmathieu out of prison and place himself there. This was as painful and as poignant as an incision in the living flesh. Then it passed away, and he said to himself, "We will see, we will see." He repressed this first generous instinct and recoiled before heroism. It would be beautiful, no doubt, after the bishop's holy words, after so many years of repentance and abnegation, in the midst of a penitence admirably begun, if this man had not flinched for an instant, even in the presence of so terrible a conjecture, but had continued to walk with the same step towards this yawning precipice, at the bottom of which lay heaven. That would have been beautiful, but it was not thus. We must render an account of the things which went on in this soul, and we can only tell what there was there. He was carried away at first by the instinct of self-preservation. He rallied all his ideas in haste, stifled his emotions, took into consideration Javert's presence, that great danger, postponed all decision with the firmness of terror, shook off thought as to what he had to do, and resumed his calmness as a warrior picks up his buckler. He remained in this state during the rest of the day, a whirlwind within, a profound tranquillity without. He took no preservative measures, as they may be called. Everything was still confused and jostling together in his brain. His trouble was so great that he could not perceive the form of a single idea distinctly, and he could have told nothing about himself, except that he had received a great blow. He repaired to Fantine's bed of suffering as usual, and prolonged his visit, through a kindly instinct, telling himself that he must behave thus, and recommend her well to the sisters, in case he should be obliged to be absent himself. He had a vague feeling that he might be obliged to go to Arras, and without having the least in the world made up his mind to this trip, he said to himself that being as he was, beyond the shadows of any suspicion, there could be nothing out of the way in being a witness to what was to take place, and he engaged the tilbury from Scaufflaire in order to be prepared in any event. He dined with a good deal of appetite. On returning to his room, he communed with himself. He examined the situation and found it unprecedented, so unprecedented that in the midst of his reverie he rose from his chair, moved by some inexplicable impulse of anxiety, and bolted his door. He feared lest something more should enter. He was barricading himself against possibilities. A moment later he extinguished his light. It embarrassed him. It seemed to him as though he might be seen. By whom? Alas, that on which he desired to close the door had already entered. That which he desired to blind was staring him in the face. His conscience. His conscience, that is to say, God. Nevertheless, he deluded himself at first. He had a feeling of security and of solitude. The bolt once drawn, he thought himself impregnable. The candle extinguished, he felt himself invisible. Then he took possession of himself. He set his elbows on the table, leaned his head on his hand, and began to meditate in the dark. Where do I stand? Am not I dreaming? What have I heard? Is it really true that I have seen that Javert, and that he spoke to me in that manner? Who can that Champmathieu be? So he resembles me. Is it possible? When I reflect that yesterday I was so tranquil, and so far from suspecting anything. What was I doing yesterday at this hour? What is there in this incident? What will the end be? What is to be done? This was the torment in which he found himself. His brain had lost its power of retaining ideas. They passed like waves, and he clutched his brow in both hands to arrest them. Nothing but anguish extricated itself from this tumult which overwhelmed his will and his reason, and from which he sought to draw proof and resolution. His head was burning. He went to the window and threw it wide open. There were no stars in the sky. He returned and seated himself at the table. The first hour passed in this manner. Gradually, however, vague outlines began to take form and to fix themselves in his meditation, and he was able to catch a glimpse with precision of the reality, not the whole situation, but some of the details. He began by recognizing the fact that, critical and extraordinary as was this situation, he was completely master of it. This only caused an increase of his stupor. Independently of the severe and religious aim which he had assigned to his actions, all that he had made up to that day had been nothing but a hole in which to bury his name. That which he had always feared most of all in his hours of self-communion, during his sleepless nights, was to ever hear that name pronounced. He had said to himself that that would be the end of all things for him, that on the day when that name made its reappearance it would cause his new life to vanish from about him, and who knows, perhaps even his new soul within him also. He shuddered at the very thought that this was possible. Assuredly, if any one had said to him at such moments that the hour would come when that name would ring in his ears, when the hideous words Jean Valjean would suddenly emerge from the darkness and rise in front of him, when that formidable light, capable of dissipating the mystery in which he had enveloped himself, would suddenly blaze forth above his head, and that that name would not menace him, that that light would but produce an obscurity more dense, that this rent veil would but increase the mystery, that this earthquake would solidify his edifice, that this prodigious incident would have no other result, so far as he was concerned, if so it seemed good to him, than that of rendering his existence at once clearer and more impenetrable, and that out of his confrontation with the phantom of Jean Valjean, the good and worthy citizen Monsieur Madeleine would emerge more honored, more peaceful, and more respected than ever. If any one had told him that, he would have tossed his head and regarded the words as those of a madman. Well, all this was precisely what had just come to pass. All that accumulation of impossibilities was a fact, and God had permitted these wild fancies to become real things. His reverie continued to grow clearer. He came more and more to an understanding of his position. It seemed to him that he had but just waked up from some inexplicable dream, and that he found himself slipping down a declivity in the middle of the night, erect, shivering, holding back all in vain, on the very brink of the abyss. He distinctly perceived in the darkness a stranger, a man unknown to him, whom destiny had mistaken for him, and whom she was thrusting into the gulf in his stead. In order that the gulf might close once more, it was necessary that someone, himself or that other man, should fall into it. He had only let things take their course. The light became complete, and he acknowledged this to himself, that his place was empty in the galleys, that do what he would, it was still awaiting him, that the theft from little Gervais had led him back to it, that this vacant place would await him, and draw him on until he filled it, that this was inevitable and fatal. And then he said to himself that at this moment he had a substitute, that it appeared that a certain Champmathieu had that ill luck, and that as regards himself, being present in the galleys in the person of that Champmathieu, present in society under the name of Monsieur Madeleine, he had nothing more to fear, provided that he did not prevent men from sealing over the head of that Champmathieu this stone of infamy, which, like the stone of the sepulchre, falls once, never to rise again. All this was so strange and so violent that there suddenly took place in him that indescribable movement which no man feels more than 2 or 3 times in the course of his life, a sort of convulsion of the conscience which stirs up all that there is doubtful in the heart, which is composed of irony, of joy, and of despair, and which may be called an outburst of inward laughter. He hastily relighted his candle. "Well, what then?" he said to himself. "What am I afraid of? What is there in all that for me to think about? I am safe. All is over. I had but one partly open door through which my past might invade my life, and behold that door is walled up forever. That Javert, who has been annoying me so long, that terrible instinct which seemed to have divined me, which had divined me, good God, and which followed me everywhere, that frightful hunting dog, always making a point at me, is thrown off the scent, engaged elsewhere, absolutely turned from the trail. Henceforth he is satisfied. He will leave me in peace. He has his Jean Valjean. Who knows? It is even probable that he will wish to leave town. And all this has been brought about without any aid from me, and I count for nothing in it. Ah, but where is the misfortune in this? Upon my honor, people would think, to see me, that some catastrophe had happened to me. After all, if it does bring harm to someone, that is not my fault in the least. It is Providence which has done it all. It is because it wishes it so to be, evidently. Have I the right to disarrange what it has arranged? What do I ask now? Why should I meddle? It does not concern me. What, I am not satisfied, but what more do I want? The goal to which I have aspired for so many years, the dream of my nights, the object of my prayers to heaven, security, I have now attained. It is God who wills it. I can do nothing against the will of God. And why does God will it? In order that I may continue what I have begun, that I may do good, that I may one day be a grand and encouraging example, that it may be said at last that a little happiness has been attached to the penance which I have undergone, and to that virtue to which I have returned. Really, I do not understand why I was afraid, a little while ago, to enter the house of that good curé, and to ask his advice. This is evidently what he would have said to me. It is settled. Let things take their course. Let the good God do as he likes. Thus did he address himself in the depths of his own conscience, bending over what may be called his own abyss. He rose from his chair and began to pace the room. "Come," said he, "let us think no more about it. My resolve is taken." But he felt no joy. Quite the reverse. One can no more prevent thought from recurring to an idea than one can the sea from returning to the shore. The sailor calls it the tide. The guilty man calls it remorse. God upheaves the soul as he does the ocean. After the expiration of a few moments, do what he would, he resumed the gloomy dialogue in which it was he who spoke and he who listened, saying that which he would have preferred to ignore, and listened to that which he would have preferred not to hear, yielding to that mysterious power which said to him, "Think," as it said to another condemned man 2,000 years ago, "March on." Before proceeding further, and in order to make ourselves fully understood, let us insist upon one necessary observation. It is certain that people do talk to themselves. There is no living being who has not done it. It may even be said that the word is never a more magnificent mystery than when it goes from thought to conscience within a man, and when it returns from conscience to thought. It is in this sense only that the words so often employed in this chapter, he said, he exclaimed, must be understood. One speaks to one's self, talks to one's self, exclaims to one's self, without breaking the external silence. There is a great tumult. Everything about us talks except the mouth. The realities of the soul are none the less realities because they are not visible and palpable. So he asked himself where he stood. He interrogated himself upon that settled resolve. He confessed to himself that all that he had just arranged in his mind was monstrous, that to let things take their course, to let the good God do as he liked, was simply horrible. To allow this error of fate and of men to be carried out, not to hinder it, to lend himself to it through his silence, to do nothing, in short, was to do everything, that this was hypocritical baseness in the last degree, that it was a base, cowardly, sneaking, abject, hideous crime. For the first time in 8 years, the wretched man had just tasted the bitter savour of an evil thought and of an evil action. He spit it out with disgust. He continued to question himself. He asked himself severely what he had meant by this. My object is attained. He declared to himself that his life really had an object. But what object? To conceal his name? To deceive the police? Was it for so petty a thing that he had done all that he had done? Had he not another and a grand object, which was the true one? To save not his person, but his soul? To become honest and good once more, to be a just man? Was it not that above all, that alone, which he had always desired, which the bishop had enjoined upon him, to shut the door on his past? But he was not shutting it. Great God, he was reopening it by committing an infamous action. He was becoming a thief once more, and the most odious of thieves. He was robbing another of his existence, his life, his peace, his place in the sunshine. He was becoming an assassin. He was murdering, morally murdering, a wretched man. He was inflicting on him that frightful living death, that death beneath the open sky, which is called the galleys. On the other hand, to surrender himself to save that man, struck down with so melancholy an error, to resume his own name, to become once more out of duty the convict Jean Valjean, that was, in truth, to achieve his resurrection, and to close forever that hell whence he had just emerged. To fall back there in appearance was to escape from it in reality. This must be done. He had done nothing if he did not do all this. His whole life was useless. All his penitence was wasted. There was no longer any need of saying, "What is the use?" He felt that the bishop was there, that the bishop was present, all the more because he was dead, that the bishop was gazing fixedly at him, that henceforth Mère Madeleine, with all his virtues, would be abominable to him, and that the convict Jean Valjean would be pure and admirable in his sight, that men beheld his mask, but that the bishop saw his face, that men saw his life, but that the bishop beheld his conscience. So he must go to Arras, deliver the false Jean Valjean, and denounce the real one. Alas, that was the greatest of sacrifices, the most poignant of victories, the last step to take, but it must be done. Sad fate, he would enter into sanctity only in the eyes of God, when he returned to infamy in the eyes of men. "Well," said he, "let us decide upon this. Let us do our duty. Let us save this man." He uttered these words aloud, without perceiving that he was speaking aloud. He took his books, verified them, and put them in order. He flung in the fire a bundle of bills which he had against petty and embarrassed tradesmen. He wrote and sealed a letter, and on the envelope it might have been read, had there been any one in his chamber at the moment, "To Monsieur Laffitte, banker, Rue d'Artois, Paris." He drew from his secretary a pocket-book which contained several bank-notes, and the passport of which he had made use that same year when he went to the elections. Anyone who had seen him during the execution of these various acts, into which there entered such grave thought, would have had no suspicion of what was going on within him. Only occasionally did his lips move. At other times he raised his head and fixed his gaze upon some point of the wall, as though there existed at that point something which he wished to elucidate or interrogate. When he had finished the letter to Monsieur Laffitte, he put it into his pocket, together with the pocket-book, and began his walk once more. His reverie had not swerved from its course. He continued to see his duty clearly, written in luminous letters, which flamed before his eyes and changed its place as he altered the direction of his glance. "Go, tell your name, denounce yourself." In the same way he beheld, as though they had passed before him in visible forms, the two ideas which had, up to that time, formed the double rule of his soul, the concealment of his name, the sanctification of his life. For the first time they appeared to him as absolutely distinct, and he perceived the distance which separated them. He recognized the fact that one of these ideas was necessarily good, while the other might become bad, that the first was self-devotion, and that the other was personality; that the one said my neighbor, and that the other said myself; that one emanated from the light, and the other from darkness. They were antagonistic. He saw them in conflict, in proportion as he meditated. They grew before the eyes of his spirit. They had now attained colossal statures, and it seemed to him that he beheld within himself, in that infinity of which we were recently speaking, in the midst of the darkness and the lights, a goddess and a giant contending. He was filled with terror, but it seemed to him that the good thought was getting the upper hand. He felt that he was on the brink of the second decisive crisis of his conscience and of his destiny, that the bishop had marked the first phase of his new life, and that Champmathieu marked the second, after the grand crisis, the grand test. But the fever, allayed for an instant, gradually resumed possession of him. 1,000 thoughts traversed his mind, but they continued to fortify him in his resolution. One moment he said to himself that he was, perhaps, taking the matter too keenly, that, after all, this Champmathieu was not interesting, and that he had actually been guilty of theft. He answered himself, if this man has, indeed, stolen a few apples, that means a month in prison. It is a long way from that to the galleys. And who knows? Did he steal? Has it been proved? The name of Jean Valjean overwhelms him, and seems to dispense with proofs. Do not the attorneys for the crown always proceed in this manner? He is supposed to be a thief because he is known to be a convict. In another instant the thought had occurred to him that, when he denounced himself, the heroism of his deed might, perhaps, be taken into consideration, and his honest life for the last 7 years, and what he had done for the district, and that they would have mercy on him. But this supposition vanished very quickly, and he smiled bitterly as he remembered that the theft of the 40 sous from little Gervais put him in the position of a man guilty of a second offence after conviction, that this affair would certainly come up, and according to the precise terms of the law, would render him liable to penal servitude for life. He turned aside from all illusions, detached himself more and more from earth, and sought strength and consolation elsewhere. He told himself that he must do his duty, that perhaps he should not be more unhappy after doing his duty than after having avoided it, that if he allowed things to take their own course, if he remained at M sur M, his consideration, his good name, his good works, the deference and veneration paid to him, his charity, his wealth, his popularity, his virtue, would be seasoned with a crime. And what would be the taste of all these holy things when bound up with this hideous thing? While, if he accomplished his sacrifice, a celestial idea would be mingled with the galleys, the post, the iron necklet, the green cap, unceasing toil, and pitiless shame. At length he told himself that it must be so, that his destiny was thus allotted, that he had not authority to alter the arrangements made on high, that in any case he must make his choice, virtue without and abomination within, or holiness within and infamy without. The stirring of these lugubrious ideas did not cause his courage to fail, but his brain grow weary. He began to think of other things, of indifferent matters, in spite of himself. The veins in his temples throbbed violently. He still paced to and fro. Midnight sounded first from the parish church, then from the town hall. He counted the 12 strokes of the 2 clocks, and compared the sound of the 2 bells. He recalled in this connection the fact that, a few days previously, he had seen in an ironmonger's shop an ancient clock for sale, upon which was written the name Antoine Albin de Romainville. He was cold. He lighted a small fire. It did not occur to him to close the window. In the meantime he had relapsed into his stupor. He was obliged to make a tolerably vigorous effort to recall what had been the subject of his thoughts before midnight had struck. He finally succeeded in doing this. "Ah, yes," he said to himself, "I had resolved to inform against myself." And then, all of a sudden, he thought of Fantine. "Hold," said he, "and what about that poor woman?" Here a fresh crisis declared itself. Fantine, by appearing thus abruptly in his reverie, produced the effect of an unexpected ray of light. It seemed to him as though everything about him were undergoing a change of aspect. He exclaimed, "Ah, but I have hitherto considered no one but myself. It is proper for me to hold my tongue, or to denounce myself, to conceal my person, or to save my soul, to be a despicable and respected magistrate, or an infamous and venerable convict. It is I, it is always I, and nothing but I. But, good God, all this is egotism. These are diverse forms of egotism, but it is egotism all the same. What if I were to think a little about others? The highest holiness is to think of others. Come, let us examine the matter. The I accepted, the I effaced, the I forgotten. What would be the result of all this? What if I denounce myself? I am arrested. This Champmathieu is released. I am put back in the galleys. That is well, and what then? What is going on here? Ah, here is a country, a town. Here are factories, an industry, workers, both men and women, aged grandsires, children, poor people. All this I have created. All these I provide with their living, everywhere where there is a smoking chimney. It is I who have placed the brand on the hearth and meat in the pot. I have created ease, circulation, credit. Before me there was nothing. I have elevated, vivified, informed with life, fecundated, stimulated, enriched the whole countryside. Lacking me, the soul is lacking. I take myself off, everything dies. And this woman, who has suffered so much, who possesses so many merits in spite of her fall, the cause of all whose misery I have unwittingly been. And that child whom I meant to go in search of, whom I have promised to her mother. Do I not also owe something to this woman, in reparation for the evil which I have done her? If I disappear, what happens? The mother dies, the child becomes what it can. That is what will take place if I denounce myself. If I do not denounce myself, come, let us see how it will be if I do not denounce myself." After putting this question to himself, he paused. He seemed to undergo a momentary hesitation and trepidation, but it did not last long, and he answered himself calmly, "Well, this man is going to the galleys, it is true, but what the deuce? He has stolen. There is no use in my saying that he has not been guilty of theft, for he has. I remain here. I go on. In 10 years I shall have made 10 millions. I scatter them over the country. I have nothing of my own. What is that to me? It is not for myself that I am doing it. The prosperity of all goes on augmenting. Industries are aroused and animated. Factories and shops are multiplied. Families, 100 families, 1,000 families, are happy. The district becomes populated. Villages spring up where there were only farms before. Farms rise where there was nothing. Wretchedness disappears, and with wretchedness debauchery, prostitution, theft, murder, all vices disappear, all crimes. And this poor mother rears her child, and behold a whole country rich and honest. Ah, I was a fool. I was absurd. What was that I was saying about denouncing myself? I really must pay attention, and not be precipitate about anything. What, because it would have pleased me to play the grand and generous, this is melodrama, after all. Because I should have thought of no one but myself, the idea, for the sake of saving from a punishment, a trifle exaggerated perhaps, but just at bottom, no one knows whom. A thief, a good-for-nothing, evidently a whole countryside must perish. A poor woman must die in the hospital. A poor little girl must die in the street, like dogs. Ah, this is abominable. And without the mother even having seen her child once more, almost without the child's having known her mother, and all that for the sake of an old wretch of an apple-thief, who most assuredly has deserved the galleys for something else, if not for that. Fine scruples indeed which save a guilty man and sacrifice the innocent, which save an old vagabond who has only a few years to live at most, and who will not be more unhappy in the galleys than in his hovel, and which sacrifice a whole population, mothers, wives, children. This poor little Cosette, who has no one in the world but me, and who is, no doubt, blue with cold at this moment in the den of those Thénardiers, Those peoples are rascals, and I was going to neglect my duty towards all these poor creatures, and I was going off to denounce myself, and I was about to commit that unspeakable folly. Let us put it at the worst. Suppose that there is a wrong action on my part in this, and that my conscience will reproach me for it some day, to accept, for the good of others, these reproaches which weigh only on myself, this evil action which compromises my soul alone, in that lies self-sacrifice, in that alone there is virtue." He rose and resumed his march. This time he seemed to be content. Diamonds are found only in the dark places of the earth. Truths are found only in the depths of thought. It seemed to him that, after having descended into these depths, after having long groped among the darkest of these shadows, he had at last found one of these diamonds, one of these truths, and that he now held it in his hand, and he was dazzled as he gazed upon it. "Yes," he thought, "this is right. I am on the right road. I have the solution. I must end by holding fast to something. My resolve is taken. Let things take their course. Let us no longer vacillate. Let us no longer hang back. This is for the interest of all, not for my own. I am Madeleine, and Madeleine I remain. Woe to the man who is Jean Valjean. I am no longer he. I do not know that man. I no longer know anything. It turns out that someone is Jean Valjean at the present moment. Let him look out for himself. That does not concern me. It is a fatal name which was floating abroad in the night. If it halts and descends on a head, so much the worse for that head." He looked into the little mirror which hung above his chimney-piece, and said, "Hold, it has relieved me to come to a decision. I am quite another man now." He proceeded a few paces further, then he stopped short. "Come," he said, "I must not flinch before any of the consequences of the resolution which I have once adopted. There are still threads which attach me to that Jean Valjean. They must be broken. In this very room there are objects which would betray me, dumb things which would bear witness against me. It is settled. All these things must disappear." He fumbled in his pocket, drew out his purse, opened it, and took out a small key. He inserted the key in a lock whose aperture could hardly be seen, so hidden was it in the most sombre tones of the design which covered the wall-paper. A secret receptacle opened, a sort of false cupboard constructed in the angle between the wall and the chimney-piece. In this hiding-place there were some rags, a blue linen blouse, an old pair of trousers, an old knapsack, and a huge thorn cudgel shod with iron at both ends. Those who had seen Jean Valjean at the epoch when he passed through D, in October 1815, could easily have recognized all the pieces of this miserable outfit. He had preserved them as he had preserved the silver candlesticks, in order to remind himself continually of his starting point. But he had concealed all that came from the galleys, and he had allowed the candlesticks which came from the bishop to be seen. He cast a furtive glance towards the door, as though he feared that it would open in spite of the bolt which fastened it. Then, with a quick and abrupt movement, he took the whole in his arms at once, without bestowing so much as a glance on the things which he had so religiously and so perilously preserved for so many years, and flung them all, rags, cudgel, knapsack, into the fire. He closed the false cupboard again, and with redoubled precautions, henceforth unnecessary, since it was now empty, he concealed the door behind a heavy piece of furniture, which he pushed in front of it. After the lapse of a few seconds, the room and the opposite wall were lighted up with a fierce, red, tremendous glow. Everything was on fire. The thorn cudgel snapped and threw its sparks to the middle of the chamber. As the knapsack was consumed, together with the hideous rags which it contained, it revealed something which sparkled in the ashes. By bending over, one could have readily recognized a coin, no doubt the 40-sou piece stolen from the little Savoyard. He did not look at the fire, but paced back and forth with the same step. All at once his eye fell on the 2 silver candlesticks, which shone vaguely on the chimney-piece through the glow. "Hold," he thought, "the whole of Jean Valjean is still in them. They must be destroyed also." He seized the 2 candlesticks. There was still fire enough to allow of their being put out of shape, and converted into a sort of unrecognizable bar of metal. He bent over the hearth and warmed himself for a moment. He felt a sense of real comfort. "How good warmth is," said he. He stirred the live coals with one of the candlesticks. A minute more, and they were both in the fire. At that moment it seemed to him that he heard a voice within him shouting, "Jean Valjean! Jean Valjean!" His hair rose upright. He became like a man who is listening to some terrible thing. "Yes, that's it. Finish," said the voice. "Complete what you are about. Destroy these candlesticks. Annihilate this souvenir. Forget the bishop. Forget everything. Destroy this Champmathieu. Do. That is right. Applaud yourself. So it is settled, resolved, fixed, agreed. Here is an old man who does not know what is wanted of him, who has perhaps done nothing, an innocent man, whose whole misfortune lies in your name, upon whom your name weighs like a crime, who is about to be taken for you, who will be condemned, who will finish his days in abjectness and horror. That is good. Be an honest man yourself. Remain Monsieur le Maire. Remain honorable and honored. Enrich the town. Nourish the indigent. Rear the orphan. Live happy, virtuous, and admired. And during this time, while you are here in the midst of joy and light, there will be a man who will wear your red blouse, who will bear your name in ignominy, and who will drag your chain in the galleys. Yes, it is well arranged thus. Ah, wretch!" The perspiration streamed from his brow. He fixed a haggard eye on the candlesticks, but that within him which had spoken had not finished. The voice continued. "Jean Valjean, there will be around you many voices, which will make a great noise, which will talk very loud, and which will bless you, and only one which no one will hear, and which will curse you in the dark. Well, listen, infamous man. All those benedictions will fall back before they reach heaven, and only the malediction will ascend to God." This voice, feeble at first, and which had proceeded from the most obscure depths of his conscience, had gradually become startling and formidable, and he now heard it in his very ear. It seemed to him that it had detached itself from him, and that it was now speaking outside of him. He thought that he heard the last words so distinctly that he glanced around the room in a sort of terror. "Is there anyone here?" he demanded aloud, in utter bewilderment. Then he resumed with a laugh which resembled that of an idiot. "How stupid I am! There can be no one." There was someone, but the person who was there was of those whom the human eye cannot see. He placed the candlesticks on the chimney-piece. Then he resumed his monotonous and lugubrious tramp, which troubled the dreams of the sleeping man beneath him, and awoke him with a start. This tramping to and fro soothed, and at the same time intoxicated him. It sometimes seems on supreme occasions as though people moved about for the purpose of asking advice of everything that they may encounter by change of place. After the lapse of a few minutes, he no longer knew his position. He now recoiled in equal terror before both the resolutions at which he had arrived in turn. The two ideas which counselled him appeared to him equally fatal. What a fatality! What conjunction that Champmathieu should have been taken for him, to be overwhelmed by precisely the means which Providence seemed to have employed, at first, to strengthen his position. There was a moment when he reflected on the future. Denounce himself, great God! Deliver himself up! With immense despair he faced all that he should be obliged to leave, all that he should be obliged to take up once more. He should have to bid farewell to that existence which was so good, so pure, so radiant, to the respect of all, to honor, to liberty. He should never more stroll in the fields. He should never more hear the birds sing in the month of May. He should never more bestow alms on the little children. He should never more experience the sweetness of having glances of gratitude and love fixed upon him. He should quit that house which he had built, that little chamber. Everything seemed charming to him at that moment. Never again should he read those books. Never more should he write on that little table of white wood. His old portress, the only servant whom he kept, would never more bring him his coffee in the morning. Great God! Instead of that, the convict gang, the iron necklet, the red waistcoat, the chain on his ankle, fatigue, the cell, the camp bed, all those horrors which he knew so well. At his age, after having been what he was, if he were only young again, but to be addressed in his old age as thou by anyone who pleased, to be searched by the convict guard, to receive the galley sergeant's cudgellings, to wear iron-bound shoes on his bare feet, to have to stretch out his leg night and morning to the hammer of the roundsman who visits the gang, to submit to the curiosity of strangers who would be told, "That man yonder is the famous Jean Valjean, who was mayor of M—sur—M," and at night, dripping with perspiration, overwhelmed with lassitude, their green caps drawn over their eyes, to remount, 2 by 2, the ladder staircase of the galleys beneath the sergeant's whip. Oh, what misery! Can destiny, then, be as malicious as an intelligent being, and become as monstrous as the human heart? And do what he would, he always fell back upon the heart-rending dilemma which lay at the foundation of his reverie. Should he remain in paradise and become a demon? Should he return to hell and become an angel? What was to be done? Great God, what was to be done? The torment from which he had escaped with so much difficulty was unchained afresh within him. His ideas began to grow confused once more. They assumed a kind of stupefied and mechanical quality which is peculiar to despair. The name of Romainville recurred incessantly to his mind, with the 2 verses of a song which he had heard in the past. He thought that Romainville was a little grove near Paris, where young lovers go to pluck lilacs in the month of April. He wavered outwardly as well as inwardly. He walked like a little child who is permitted to toddle alone. At intervals, as he combated his lassitude, he made an effort to recover the mastery of his mind. He tried to put to himself for the last time and definitely the problem over which he had, in a manner, fallen prostrate with fatigue. Ought he to denounce himself? Ought he to hold his peace? He could not manage to see anything distinctly. The vague aspects of all the courses of reasoning which had been sketched out by his meditations quivered and vanished, one after the other, into smoke. He only felt that, to whatever course of action he made up in his mind, something in him must die, and that of necessity, and without his being able to escape the fact that he was entering a sepulchre on the right hand as much as on the left, that he was passing through a death agony, the agony of his happiness, or the agony of his virtue. Alas, all his resolution had again taken possession of him. He was no further advanced than at the beginning. Thus did the unhappy soul struggle in its anguish. 1800 years before this unfortunate man, the mysterious being, in whom are summed up all the sanctities and all the sufferings of humanity, had also long thrust aside with his hand, while the olive trees quivered in the wild wind of the infinite, the terrible cup which appeared to him dripping with darkness and overflowing with shadows in the depths, all studded with stars. End of Book 7, Chapter 3.
Book 7, Chapter 4 of Les Misérables. Les Misérables by Victor Hugo, translated by Isabel F. Hapgood. Book 7, The Champmathieu Affair. Chapter 4, Forms Assumed by Suffering During Sleep. 3 o'clock in the morning had just struck, and he had been walking thus for 5 hours, almost uninterruptedly, when he at length allowed himself to drop into his chair. There he fell asleep and had a dream. This dream, like the majority of dreams, bore no relation to the situation, except by its painful and heart-rending character, but it made an impression on him. This nightmare struck him so forcibly that he wrote it down later on. It is one of the papers in his own handwriting which he has bequeathed to us. We think that we have here reproduced the thing in strict accordance with the text. Of whatever nature this dream may be, the history of this night would be incomplete if we were to omit it. It is the gloomy adventure of an ailing soul. Here it is. On the envelope we find this line inscribed, "The dream I had that night." I was in a plain, a vast gloomy plain, where there was no grass. It did not seem to me to be daylight nor yet night. I was walking with my brother, the brother of my childish years, the brother of whom I must say I never think, and whom I now hardly remember. We were conversing, and we met some passers-by. We were talking of a neighbor of ours in former days, who had always worked with her window open from the time when she came to live on the street. As we talked, we felt cold because of that open window. There were no trees in the plain. We saw a man passing close to us. He was entirely nude, of the hue of ashes, and mounted on a horse which was earth-color. The man had no hair. We could see his skull and the veins on it. In his hand he held a switch, which was as supple as a vine shoot and as heavy as iron. This horseman passed and said nothing to us. My brother said to me, "Let us take the hollow road." There existed a hollow way wherein one saw neither a single shrub nor a spear of moss. Everything was dirt-colored, even the sky. After proceeding a few paces, I received no reply when I spoke. I perceived that my brother was no longer with me. I entered a village which I espied. I reflected that it must be Romainville. Why Romainville? The first street that I entered was deserted. I entered a second street. Behind the angle formed by the two streets, a man was standing erect against the wall. I said this to the man. "What country is this? Where am I?" The man made no reply. I saw the door of a house open, and I entered. The first chamber was deserted. I entered the second. Behind the door of this chamber, a man was standing erect against the wall. I inquired of this man, "Whose house is this? Where am I?" The man replied not. The house had a garden. I quitted the house and entered the garden. The garden was deserted. Behind the first tree I found a man standing upright. I said to this man, "What garden is this? Where am I?" The man did not answer. I strolled into the village and perceived that it was a town. All the streets were deserted, all the doors were open. Not a single living being was passing in the streets, walking through the chambers, or strolling in the gardens. But behind each angle of the walls, behind each door, behind each tree, stood a silent man. Only one was to be seen at a time. These men watched me pass. I left the town and began to ramble about the fields. After the lapse of some time, I turned back and saw a great crowd coming up behind me. I recognized all the men whom I had seen in that town. They had strange heads. They did not seem to be in a hurry, yet they walked faster than I did. They made no noise as they walked. In an instant this crowd had overtaken and surrounded me. The faces of these men were earthen in hue. The first one whom I had seen and questioned on entering the town said to me, "Whither are you going? Do you not know that you have been dead this long time?" I opened my mouth to reply, and I perceived that there was no one near me. He woke. He was icy cold. A wind which was chill like the breeze of dawn was rattling the leaves of the window, which had been left open on their hinges. The fire was out. The candle was nearing its end. It was still black night. He rose, he went to the window. There were no stars in the sky even yet. From his window the yard of the house and the street were visible. A sharp, harsh noise, which made him drop his eyes, resounded from the earth. Below him he perceived 2 red stars, whose rays lengthened and shortened in a singular manner through the darkness. As his thoughts were still half immersed in the mists of sleep, "Hold," said he, "there are no stars in the sky. They are on earth now." But this confusion vanished. A second sound similar to the first roused him thoroughly. He looked and recognized the fact that these 2 stars were the lanterns of a carriage. By the light which they cast he was able to distinguish the form of this vehicle. It was a tilbury harnessed to a small white horse. The noise which he had heard was the trampling of the horse's hoofs on the pavement. "What vehicle is this?" he said to himself. "Who is coming here so early in the morning?" At that moment there came a light tap on the door of his chamber. He shuddered from head to foot and cried in a terrible voice, "Who is there?" Someone said, "I, Monsieur le Maire." He recognized the voice of the old woman who was his portress. "Well," he replied, "what is it?" "Monsieur le Maire, it is just 5 o'clock in the morning." "What is that to me?" "The cabriolet is here, Monsieur le Maire." "What cabriolet?" "The tilbury." "What tilbury?" "Did not Monsieur le Maire order a tilbury?" "No," said he. "The coachman says that he has come for Monsieur le Maire." "What coachman?" "Monsieur Scaufflaire's coachman." "Monsieur Scaufflaire?" That name sent a shudder over him, as though a flash of lightning had passed in front of his face. "Ah, yes," he resumed, "Monsieur Scaufflaire." If the old woman could have seen him at that moment, she would have been frightened. A tolerably long silence ensued. He examined the flame of the candle with a stupid air, and from around the wick he took some of the burning wax, which he rolled between his fingers. The old woman waited for him. She even ventured to uplift her voice once more. "What am I to say, Monsieur le Maire?" "Say that it is well, and that I am coming down." End of Book 7, Chapter 4.